Evelyn's fingers trembled as they gripped the rough wooden post outside the general store, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The cowboy stood 3 feet away, his hand extended, and she couldn't stop the words that tore from her throat. "Please, don't bite me, okay?" The town went silent. Women stopped mid-conversation. Men turned to stare. Heat flooded her face as she realized what she'd said. How broken she must sound. But Colt Maddox didn't laugh, didn't mock. His hand stayed steady in the air between them, and his voice dropped to something impossibly gentle. "Only if you want it, darling." Before we continue with Evelyn and Colt's story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And we'd love to know. Comment below with your city name so we can see how far our stories have traveled. Now, let's get back to Dust River, Texas, 1884. The stagecoach had deposited Evelyn Carter in Dust River exactly 43 minutes earlier, and already she'd made a spectacle of herself. She stood frozen outside Harrigan's General Store, her carpetbag at her feet, staring at the tall man in dusty boots who'd just offered to carry her belongings. The same man who'd written her the letter. The same man she'd agreed to marry sight unseen because anything, absolutely anything, was better than Marcus Thornwood's hands on her skin. "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered, pulling her hand back against her chest. "I didn't mean... I don't know why I said that." Colt Maddox lowered his outstretched hand slowly, deliberately, the way someone might move around a spooked horse. "No need to apologize, miss. Heat does strange things to a person's mind." But it wasn't the heat. Evelyn knew that. It was the memory of Marcus grabbing her wrist outside her father's study, yanking her close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, close enough that his teeth had actually grazed her shoulder before she'd broken free and run. The bite mark had faded weeks ago. The terror hadn't. "I'm Evelyn Carter," she managed, though her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. "You're Mr. Maddox?" "Colt's fine." He shifted his weight, and Evelyn flinched. He noticed. She saw him notice, saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, but something that might have been understanding. "Your letter said you'd arrive on the afternoon stage, right on time." "I try to be reliable." "That's so." His mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Then I reckon we'll get along just fine." An older woman emerged from the general store, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Colt Maddox, are you going to introduce me to your intended, or are you planning to conduct your courtship on the street, like common folk?" "Mrs. Harrigan," Colt said, tipping his hat. "This is Miss Evelyn Carter." "Evelyn, Mrs. Harrigan owns half this town, and knows the other half's business before they do." "Only the important business," Mrs. Harrigan corrected, but her eyes had already catalogued everything about Evelyn. The wrinkled traveling dress, the too-tight grip on her bag, the way she held herself like something that might shatter. "You're thinner than your photograph, child." "I haven't been eating well," Evelyn admitted. "We'll fix that." Mrs. Harrigan turned to Colt. "You're taking her to the ranch tonight?" "Unless she'd prefer the boarding house." The suggestion hung in the air. Evelyn knew what it meant. A choice, an out, a way to delay the inevitable. But delay meant risk. Delay meant Marcus's private investigators might catch up with her trail. Delay meant more nights jumping at shadows. "The ranch is fine," Evelyn said quickly. If you still want..." "I sent for you, didn't I?" Colt picked up her bag without asking permission this time, and Evelyn forced herself not to recoil. "Wagon's around back. You eatin'?" "On the stage." "Liar." The word was gentle, almost amused. "You've got that look women get when they're running on nothing but coffee and pride. We'll stop by the ranch first, get you settled. Then we'll talk about the rest." The rest. The marriage. The arrangement. The fact that she was trading one form of ownership for another, even if Colt Maddox's letters had suggested he might be different from Marcus Thornwood. Might being the operative word. Evelyn followed him around the building to where a weathered wagon stood hitched to two horses. Colt loaded her bag into the back, then turned to help her up. She stared at his offered hand like it was a snake. "I can manage," she said. "I'm sure you can." He didn't lower his hand. "But the step's higher than it looks, and if you fall and break something, Doc Pritchard's going to charge me for the house call." It was such a practical, mundane reason that Evelyn almost laughed. She placed her hand in his, brief contact, nothing more, and let him steady her as she climbed onto the wagon seat. His palm was calloused, warm, and he released her the instant she was settled. Colt swung up beside her and gathered the reins. "Ranch is about 5 miles out. You need anything before we head that direction?" "No." "You sure? Last chance for civilization for a while." Evelyn glanced back at Dust River's single street, false-fronted buildings, a scattering of people who were absolutely watching their departure. "I'm sure." The wagon lurched forward, and they rode in silence for the first mile. Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the late afternoon sun painted the prairie in shades of amber and rust. She could feel Colt's presence beside her, solid, quiet, unsettlingly patient. "You going to tell me what happened?" he finally asked. "Or are we going to spend our first month dancing around it?" "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice stayed level, matter of fact. "Something bad enough that you'd answer a stranger's advertisement and travel halfway across the country. Something that makes you afraid of men. Specifically, afraid of being touched." Evelyn's throat tightened. "The advertisement said you wanted a wife who could work, who wouldn't complain about the isolation. I can do both those things." "I'm sure you can. That doesn't answer my question." "Maybe I don't want to answer it." Colt was quiet for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough. But I need to know one thing, and I need the truth. Are you running from the law?" "No." "From family?" Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. "From my father's business arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where he decided my virginity was worth $5,000 and a partnership in a silver mine." The words came out flat, emotionless. She'd practiced them in her head so many times that they'd lost their ability to wound her. Almost. The kind where the buyer didn't like hearing the word no. Colt's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "This buyer got a name?" "Why? You planning to ride back to Philadelphia and shoot him?" "Depends. He put hands on you?" The bite mark, the bruises on her wrists that had only just faded, the way Marcus had cornered her in the conservatory and told her, with absolute certainty, that she'd learn to enjoy it once they were married. "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "Then yeah," Colt said quietly. "I'm thinking about it." Something in Evelyn's chest cracked open. Not quite hope, not quite relief, but something close to both. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. Man who hurts women deserves whatever he gets." They rode in silence for another quarter mile before Evelyn found her voice again. "Your letter said you needed help with the ranch, that you weren't looking for romance or anything like that." "That's right." "So this is just a business arrangement?" Colt glanced at her, and for the first time, she caught something complicated in his expression. "Is that what you want it to be?" "I don't know what I want," Evelyn admitted. "I just know what I don't want." "Then we'll start there." He turned his attention back to the road. "Here's what I'm offering. Roof over your head, food on the table. Your own room with a lock on the door. I need help with the ranch work, cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. In exchange, you get safety and a legal name that's not the one you were born with. We make it legal in front of witnesses, and anybody comes looking for Evelyn Carter, they're going to find Mrs. Colt Maddox instead. Different person entirely. And what do you get out of this? A partner. Someone who'll pull their weight and not run off when times get hard. That's all? His mouth quirked again, that almost smile that suggested he found her amusing despite everything. You asking if I'm going to demand my husbandly rights? Heat flooded Evelyn's face. I'm asking what you expect. I expect you to work hard and not steal my horse. Colt kept his eyes on the prairie ahead. Anything else is between you and God and your own conscience. I'm not in the business of forcing women into my bed. Most men would consider that part of the arrangement. I'm not most men. How do I know that? Colt pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the empty road and turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd left town. His eyes were gray-blue, weathered at the corners, and absolutely direct. You don't, he said simply. You're going to have to take a leap of faith, same as I am. I'm trusting you're not going to poison my coffee or set fire to my barn. You're trusting I'm not going to turn into the same kind of bastard you ran from. We're both taking risks here, Evelyn. Question is whether you're willing to take yours. Evelyn studied his face, the honest angles of it, the patient stillness. She thought about Marcus Thornwood's smooth promises and violent hands. She thought about her father signing documents while she begged him not to. She thought about the private investigator she'd spotted in the train station in St. Louis, the one who'd made her change her route 3 times before she felt safe enough to continue west. I'm willing, she said quietly. Good. Colt flicked the reins, and the wagon started moving again. Then let's get you home. Home. The words settled strangely in Evelyn's chest. She hadn't had a home in 3 months, not since the night she'd climbed out her bedroom window with nothing but the clothes on her back and what little money she'd managed to steal from her father's desk. She'd lived in boarding houses and train cars, and one memorable night in a barn where the farmer's wife had taken pity on her. But home? That was something different entirely. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent. A low-slung house, a barn, corrals holding horses and cattle, a windmill turning lazily in the breeze. It looked weathered but solid, the kind of place built to last through hard seasons. It's not much, Colt said as he pulled the wagon up to the house. But it's paid for. No debts, no mortgages, nobody who can take it away. It's perfect, Evelyn said, and meant it. Colt hopped down and came around to help her descend. This time Evelyn took his hand without hesitation, letting him steady her as her boots touched solid ground. He released her immediately and grabbed her bag from the wagon bed. Come on, I'll show you around. The house was simple. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, 2 bedrooms, and a small washroom. Everything was clean but sparse, the furnishings functional rather than decorative. A bachelor's dwelling, built for survival rather than comfort. Colt set her bag down in the smaller bedroom. This is yours. Door's got a lock, like I promised. Key's in the drawer of that dresser. Evelyn stepped into the room and found the key exactly where he'd said it would be. The small metal weight of it felt like salvation in her palm. Thank you, she managed. No need. Colt backed toward the doorway. I'm going to tend the horses and check the stock before dark. You want to freshen up? There's a pump in the kitchen and clean towels in the cupboard. Supper's in about an hour. Nothing fancy, just stew and cornbread. I can cook, Evelyn said quickly. That's part of our arrangement, isn't it? Tomorrow. Something in his voice gentled. Tonight, you just get your bearings. He left before she could argue, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, the front door closing with a soft click behind him. Evelyn stood in the middle of her new room, clutching the key, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten how to name. Safe. She tested the lock 3 times to make sure it worked, then unpacked her carpet bag with hands that finally stopped shaking. 2 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, the one photograph she had of her mother, and the small pistol she'd bought in Kansas City with the last of her money. She tucked the gun under her pillow, old habits dying hard, then washed her face and changed into her less wrinkled dress. By the time she emerged from the bedroom, Colt had returned from the barn. He'd washed up at the pump and was ladling stew into 2 bowls at the kitchen table. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a chair. Evelyn sat. They ate in silence for several minutes before Colt spoke again. "I've been thinking about the timeline." "Timeline?" "For making this legal. The sooner we get you married off, the sooner you've got legal protection. There's a circuit judge comes through Dust River first Monday of every month. That's 5 days from now. 5 days until she became someone else entirely. 5 days until Evelyn Carter ceased to exist and Mrs. Colt Maddox took her place. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. "That's fast," she said. "It's practical, but if you need more time—" "No." Evelyn set down her spoon. 5 days is fine. Better than fine. But I need to ask you something first." "Go ahead." "What happens after? After we're married legally, I mean. Do things change?" Colt leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's up to you. Way I see it, we're building something here. Partnership first, everything else second. Maybe someday you'll trust me enough that you won't flinch every time I move too fast. Maybe someday I'll tell you why I needed to send for a wife instead of courting one of the women in town. But that's someday. Right now, we're just 2 people trying to survive with a little more help than we had yesterday. And if I'm never—" Evelyn's voice caught. "If I'm never able to be a proper wife to you? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." He pushed his empty bowl aside. "I'm 34 years old, Evelyn. I've been alone long enough to know the difference between loneliness and desperation. I don't need you warming my bed to make this arrangement worthwhile." "What do you need?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. "Honestly?" Colt's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I need someone who won't leave. Every ranch hand I've hired is taken off within 6 months. Too isolated, they say. Too quiet. I'm tired of training people just to watch them disappear. So what I need is someone who'll stay. Someone who'll put down roots. Someone who'll fight for this place the same way I do." "I'll stay," Evelyn said softly. "I promise you that much." "Good enough for me." They finished supper in comfortable silence. Then Colt showed her how to work the kitchen stove and where he kept the pantry supplies. Everything was organized with military precision. Flour in one tin, sugar in another, coffee beans in a sealed jar. A man who lived alone learned to be systematic or starve. "I'll teach you the ranch work gradually," Colt said as he banked the fire for the night. "No point throwing you into the deep end before you've learned to swim. Tomorrow we'll start with the chickens and work our way up from there." Evelyn nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through 3 states and a dozen close calls was draining away, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness in its wake. "I should sleep," she said. "Good idea." Colt walked her to her bedroom door, but stopped a respectful distance away. "Breakfast is at dawn. I'll knock, but I won't come in unless you tell me it's okay." "Thank you." "Evelyn?" His voice stopped her before she could close the door. "Yes?" "I meant what I said earlier, about not biting unless you want it." His expression was serious, almost solemn. "I'm not going to hurt you. Not intentionally, not accidentally, not ever. You've got my word on that." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because someone should have been kind to you a long time ago." He tipped his hat, a strangely formal gesture that felt like respect rather than courtship. "Sleep well." He turned and headed toward his own room, leaving Evelyn standing in her doorway with tears burning behind her eyes. She closed the door, turned the lock, and pressed her forehead against the solid wood. For the first time since Philadelphia, she believed she might actually survive this. She might even be happy. The thought terrified her more than anything Marcus Thornwood had ever done. Morning came with a knock so gentle that Evelyn almost missed it through the fog of the first real sleep she'd had in weeks. "Evelyn?" Colt's voice carried through the locked door. "Sun's up. Breakfast in 15 minutes if you're hungry." She was out of bed before she'd fully processed the words, her hand already reaching for the door handle, before she remembered to check that she was decent. The nightgown would have to do. She threw her shawl over it and unlocked the door with fingers that still remembered how to shake. Colt was already back in the kitchen when she emerged, cracking eggs into a skillet with the efficiency of someone who'd been feeding himself for years. He glanced up, registered her state of undress, and immediately shifted his attention back to the stove. "Coffee's hot," he said. "Mugs are in the cupboard above the pump." Evelyn poured herself a cup and wrapped both hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "I should be doing this. The cooking, I mean. That's part of our arrangement." "You will be, starting tomorrow." He slid eggs onto 2 plates, added bacon and biscuits that looked like they'd been made the night before. "Today, you're learning the ranch. Can't cook if you don't know where anything comes from." They ate quickly, efficiently, and then Colt handed her a pair of worn leather gloves that were 3 sizes too big. "Your hands are soft," he said. "They won't be by tonight, but these'll help." The chicken coop was her first lesson. Colt showed her how to scatter feed, how to check for eggs without getting pecked, how to tell which hens were broody and which were just mean-spirited. Evelyn collected eggs with careful precision, placing each one in the basket like it was made of glass. "You're thinking too hard," Colt observed. "They're just eggs. A few break, we'll eat scrambled instead of fried." "I don't want to waste anything." "It's not waste if you tried your best." He took the basket from her and headed toward the barn. "Come on, cows won't milk themselves." The milk cow's name was Buttercup, which seemed absurdly gentle for an animal that weighed more than 3 men combined. Evelyn approached her with the same caution she'd approach a loaded weapon. "She won't hurt you," Colt said. "Here, sit on the stool. I'll show you how it's done." He demonstrated the rhythm: pull, squeeze, until milk streamed into the pail in steady white streams. Then he stood and gestured for Evelyn to take his place. She sat, reached for the cow's udder, froze when Colt moved behind her to adjust her position. "Easy," he said quietly, and stepped back immediately. "You need to lean in more. Get your weight behind it. Here." He picked up a stick from the barn floor and used it to indicate the angle without touching her. "Like this. See?" Evelyn tried again, and this time milk came. Not much, not smoothly, but enough that she felt a small spark of accomplishment. "There you go," Colt said. "You'll get the hang of it." By noon, Evelyn's hands were cramping, and her back ached from bending over. Colt called a break for lunch, cold biscuits and ham from the spring house, and they sat on the porch steps eating in companionable silence. "You did good this morning," he said finally. "I spilled half the milk." "First day. You'll do better tomorrow." How long did it take you to learn all this? Colt's expression shifted into something complicated. Grew up on a ranch in Montana. My father believed in hard work and harder discipline. I could milk a cow by the time I was 5. Is that why you came here? To get away from him? He's dead now. Has been for 10 years. Colt finished his biscuit and brushed the crumbs from his hands. But yeah, that's part of why I left. Evelyn wanted to ask more, but something in his posture told her the subject was closed. They had that in common, at least. Pasts too painful to examine in broad daylight. The afternoon brought new lessons. Mending fence posts, checking water troughs, learning which horses could be trusted and which had mean streaks. Colt moved through the work with steady patience, never rushing her, never showing frustration when she fumbled or failed. But every time he reached out to correct her grip or steady her balance, Evelyn flinched. Every time. And every time, Colt noticed and adjusted, keeping his distance, using words instead of touch. By evening, the gloves had rubbed blisters on her palms, despite their protection. Colt saw her wince when she tried to work the pump and took over without comment, filling the basin so she could wash up before supper. "Let me see your hands," he said when she'd dried them. "They're fine." "Liar, show me." Evelyn held them out reluctantly. The blisters were angry and red, some already starting to weep. Colt's jaw tightened. "Wait here." He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a small tin of salve. "This'll help. May I?" The question hung between them. Permission. Choice. The opposite of everything Marcus Thornwood had represented. "Yes," Evelyn whispered. Colt took her right hand in his, gently, carefully, like she was something precious, and began applying the salve with calloused fingertips that somehow managed to be tender. The medicine stung, but Evelyn didn't pull away. She watched his face instead. The concentration there, the concern. "This is going to happen every day for a while," he said quietly. "Your body's not used to this kind of work, but you'll toughen up. Skin learns to protect itself. Does it?" The question came out more bitter than she'd intended. Colt's eyes met hers. "Eventually, if you let it." He finished with her right hand and moved to her left. The same careful attention, the same gentleness. When he was done, he capped the tin and set it on the table between them. "Keep this in your room. Use it every night before bed." "Thank you." "It's not charity, Evelyn. You're working hard. You deserve to not be in pain while you do it." Supper was beans and cornbread that Colt had made while she was washing up. They ate at the kitchen table, and this time Evelyn was the one who broke the silence. "Tell me about the town," she said. "The people. What should I expect when we go in for the wedding?" Colt leaned back in his chair. "Dust River's small, maybe 300 people if you count the outlying ranches. Most folks are decent enough, mind their own business. But you'll get questions about where you're from, why you answered an advertisement, what your family situation is." "What should I tell them?" "As little as possible. Truth is, it's none of their damn business. But if you need a story, keep it simple. You're from back east, your parents are dead, you wanted a fresh start. That covers most of it." "My parents aren't dead." "Might as well be from what you've told me." Colt's voice hardened slightly. "Man who'd sell his daughter doesn't deserve the title of father." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He wasn't always like that. Before my mother died, he was different, kinder." "Grief changes people. Doesn't excuse what he did." "I know." She pushed beans around her plate without eating them. "I keep thinking he'll come after me, or send someone. That investigator in St. Louis." "You're sure he was following you?" "I'm sure he was looking for someone, and when I changed trains, he didn't follow. But that doesn't mean there aren't others." Colt was quiet for a long moment. "We'll make it legal on Monday. Once you're married, you've got more protection. And if anyone does come looking, They'll have to go through me first.
You can't fight the kind of money Marcus has.
Can't I? Something dangerous flickered in Colt's expression. Money doesn't mean much out here, Evelyn. A bullet costs the same, whether you're rich or poor. The casual violence in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like relief. Someone willing to stand between her and the past. Someone willing to fight.
I don't want you to kill anyone for me, she said softly.
Then let's hope it doesn't come to that. They cleaned up the supper dishes together, moving around the small kitchen in a careful dance of proximity and distance. Evelyn washed, Colt dried, and neither of them mentioned how her hands trembled when he reached past her for another plate. That night, Evelyn lay in her locked bedroom and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Horses nickering in the barn, wind rattling the shutters, Colt's quiet footsteps in the other room as he prepared for bed. She thought about his hands on hers, applying salve to her blisters. The gentleness of it. The permission he'd asked for before touching her. The way he'd stepped back immediately when she'd frozen by the milk cow. Marcus had never asked permission for anything. Sleep came easier than it had the night before, but her dreams were still full of shadows and teeth. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Wake at dawn, work until her muscles screamed. Learn something new every hour. How to curry a horse. How to spot signs of illness in cattle. How to tell when a storm was coming by the way the air tasted. Colt was patient, methodical, never asking more than she could give. And every evening he'd check her hands, apply more salve, and tell her she was doing well, even when they both knew she'd fumbled half the tasks he'd set her. On Saturday, Colt announced they'd be going into town the next morning for church. I don't attend regularly, he admitted, but people will expect to see us together before the wedding. Better to get it over with.
Will there be questions?
Guaranteed.
What if I say something wrong?
Colt looked at her across the supper table, his expression serious. There's no wrong thing to say, Evelyn. You're allowed to be nervous. You're allowed to be uncertain. Hell, you're allowed to tell them all to mind their own business if you want. But you're also allowed to just be yourself.
What if myself isn't good enough?
Then they're not worth impressing. Sunday morning found Evelyn in her better dress, still wrinkled from the carpet bag, but cleaner than it had been, with her hair pinned up and her hands hidden in gloves to conceal the worst of the blisters. Colt wore a clean shirt and had even shaved, though he'd nicked himself twice and the cut stood out against his jaw. The ride into town was quiet. Evelyn's stomach churned with anxiety, but Colt seemed perfectly calm, almost indifferent to the scrutiny they were about to face. The church was a simple white building with a crooked steeple. People were already gathering outside when they arrived. Women in their Sunday best and men in suits that looked uncomfortable. Every single person turned to stare as Colt helped Evelyn down from the wagon. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll lose interest in 5 minutes." They didn't. If anything, the curiosity intensified as Colt guided Evelyn toward the church entrance. An older woman with steel gray hair and a face like a hatchet blocked their path. "Colt Maddox," she announced. "I heard you'd finally found yourself a bride. About time." "Mrs. Pritchard." Colt's voice was polite but cool. "This is Evelyn Carter. Evelyn, Mrs. Pritchard is the judge's wife." "Soon to be Mrs. Maddox, I understand." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes raked over Evelyn like she was livestock at auction. "You're thinner than I expected. And younger. How old are you, child?"
23, Evelyn managed.
And your family approved this arrangement?"
"My family's dead."
The lie came smoothly, practiced. "I had no other prospects." Sad business, losing one's people. But Mrs. Pritchard's eyes said she didn't quite believe it.
"Well, we'll see you both tomorrow at the courthouse.
1 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." She swept past them into the church, and Colt exhaled slowly.
That wasn't so bad, he said. She thinks I'm lying. She thinks everyone's lying. It's her natural state. He offered Evelyn his arm, the first time he'd done so, and she took it with only a slight hesitation. Come on, let's get this over with. The service was interminable. Evelyn sat beside Colt in the back pew, acutely aware of every glance thrown their direction, every whispered comment that carried just far enough for her to catch fragments. Strange girl. Desperate, probably. Wonder what she's running from. Hope Colt knows what he's getting into. She kept her eyes fixed on the minister and tried to ignore the crawling sensation between her shoulder blades. Afterward, there was coffee and cake in the church hall. Colt steered Evelyn toward a corner and brought her a plate she couldn't eat and coffee she couldn't drink. Her hands were shaking too badly to trust them. You're doing fine, Colt said quietly. I feel like an animal in a zoo. That's because they're treating you like one. Give it time. Something more interesting will happen next week, and they'll forget all about us. But before the gossips could lose interest, a man approached, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He extended a hand to Colt first. Maddox, heard you were getting hitched. Congratulations. Dalton. Colt's voice went flat. He didn't take the offered hand. What do you want? Just being neighborly. The man, Dalton, turned his attention to Evelyn, and something in his gaze made her skin crawl. And you must be the bride-to-be. Thomas Dalton, at your service. I own the Double D Ranch north of here. Mr. Dalton. Evelyn didn't offer her hand. Please, call me Thomas. He leaned closer, and Evelyn caught the scent of expensive cologne. I have to say, Maddox, you've done well for yourself. She's a beauty. She's also standing right here, Evelyn said coldly, and capable of speaking for herself. Dalton laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Spirited, too. I like that. Tell me, Miss Carter, what brings a refined lady like yourself to our humble territory? Opportunity, Evelyn said. Of what sort? The sort that's none of your concern. Colt's voice had gone dangerous. We done here, Dalton? For now. Dalton tipped his hat to Evelyn, but his eyes lingered too long, assessed too thoroughly. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Carter. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. He walked away, and Evelyn felt the tension in Colt's shoulders like a physical thing. Who was that? She asked. Trouble. Colt guided her toward the door. We're leaving.
But we just got here. Now, Evelyn. She didn't argue. Something in Colt's tone told her this wasn't the time for questions. They made it to the wagon and were halfway back to the ranch before Evelyn found her voice again. You want to tell me what that was about? Dalton's been trying to buy my land for 3 years. I keep telling him no. He keeps making offers. Why does he want it so badly? My property has the only reliable water source for miles. Control the water, control the ranches that depend on it. Colt's hands tightened on the reins. He's the kind of man who doesn't like hearing no. Makes him mean. Is he dangerous? Could be. Colt glanced at her. But not to you. You're under my protection now. He won't risk open conflict. Evelyn wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the way Dalton had looked at her, the same way Marcus Thornwood had looked at her. Like she was a possession to be acquired. Like her preferences didn't matter. What if he doesn't care about risk? She asked quietly. Then we'll deal with it when the time comes. Colt's voice softened slightly. One problem at a time, Evelyn. First we get you legally married. Then we worry about everything else. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in her locked bedroom and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Tomorrow, she'd become Mrs. Colt Maddox. Tomorrow, she'd tie herself legally to a man she'd known for less than a week. Tomorrow, she'd step into a new identity and hope like hell the old one didn't catch up with her. And somewhere in Philadelphia, Marcus Thornwood was probably still looking. Somewhere north of here, Thomas Dalton was probably planning his next move. And somewhere, in this small ranch house, Colt Maddox was probably lying awake too, wondering if he'd made the right choice, sending for a bride he'd never met. Evelyn touched the blisters on her palms, healing now, hardening into calluses just like Colt had promised. Skin learning to protect itself. Maybe she could learn too. Maybe she already was. She was still awake when dawn broke, her eyes burning from lack of sleep, but her mind too restless to surrender. The knock came at 5:30 instead of 6, and Colt's voice carried a tension she hadn't heard before. "Change of plans. We're leaving for town in 20 minutes. Evelyn was at the door in seconds, unlocking it to find Colt already dressed in his Sunday suit, his jaw tight. "What's wrong?" Maybe nothing. Probably nothing. But his eyes said different. "One of my horses is missing from the pasture. Could have jumped the fence, could have wandered off, or someone could have taken it." "Dalton?" "Don't know yet, but I'm not leaving the ranch unattended any longer than necessary." He handed her a bundle, her better dress, freshly pressed. "Mrs. Harrigan did this yesterday. Said every bride deserves to look proper, even if the circumstances aren't ideal." Evelyn took the dress, touched by the unexpected kindness. 20 minutes? 15 now. I'll make coffee." She dressed in record time, her fingers clumsy with the buttons, her heart hammering against her ribs. Today. It was happening today. In a few hours, she'd be married to a man she'd known for 6 days, bound legally and permanently to someone who was still mostly a stranger. The alternative was Marcus Thornwood's hands on her skin, Marcus Thornwood's teeth grazing her shoulder, Marcus Thornwood's absolute certainty that she'd learned to enjoy it. 15 minutes later, she emerged from her room to find Colt pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Coffee's on the table," he said without stopping his circuit. "Drink it fast. We need to go." "What aren't you telling me?" He stopped, met her eyes. "The horse that's missing? It's the fastest one I own. If someone took it, they didn't take it for pleasure riding. You think someone's coming here? I think I'd rather be in town, surrounded by witnesses, than out here alone when we find out." He grabbed his hat. "Come on." The ride into Dust River took 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. Colt pushed the horses harder than he had before, and Evelyn gripped the wagon seat with white knuckles, watching the horizon for riders that never appeared. "Maybe I'm being paranoid," Colt said as they approached town. "Maybe the damn horse just found a weak spot in the fence. Or maybe you're being smart." 6 of 1. He pulled the wagon up in front of the courthouse, a square brick building that looked more like a jail than a place where lives changed hands. "We're early. Judge won't be here for another hour." "So what do we do?" Colt climbed down and came around to help her descend. "We wait, and we stay where people can see us." They ended up at Mrs. Harrigan's general store, where the proprietress took one look at Evelyn's pale face and put a cup of tea in her hands without asking. "Wedding day nerves," she announced to the empty store. "Perfectly natural. I threw up twice before my own ceremony." "I'm fine," Evelyn managed. "Of course you are, dear. That's why you're shaking like a leaf in the thunderstorm." Mrs. Harrigan turned to Colt. "And you, stop hovering. You're making her more nervous." "Someone stole one of my horses last night," Colt said bluntly. Mrs. Harrigan's expression shifted from maternal to sharp in an instant. "You sure?" "Sure enough." "You tell the sheriff?" "He's useless and you know it. I'm telling you instead." Mrs. Harrigan nodded slowly. "I'll spread the word. Anyone tries to sell a horse matching your description, I'll hear about it within the hour." She turned back to Evelyn. "Drink your tea, child. And try to remember,
that whatever brought you here, you're safe now.
Colt Maddox might be rough around the edges, but he's never broken a promise in his life. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they reminded Evelyn of all the promises Marcus Thornwood had made. All the lies that had sounded like truth until his hands had proved otherwise. By 12:30, a small crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. Evelyn recognized faces from church, Mrs. Pritchard with her judgmental scowl, a handful of ranch wives who'd whispered behind their hands, a few cowboys who worked for neighboring spreads, and Thomas Dalton, leaning against a hitching post with his arms crossed and that same predatory smile. "Ignore him," Colt murmured. "He's just here to make a point." "What point?" "That he exists. That he's watching." Colt's hand found the small of her back, the first time he touched her without asking permission, and guided her toward the courthouse steps. "Let him watch. Won't change what happens in the next hour." Judge Pritchard appeared at exactly 1 o'clock, his wife trailing behind him with a Bible and a witness ledger. The judge was a compact man with shrewd eyes and a mouth that suggested he'd heard every lie ever told. "Maddox," he said, nodding to Colt. "Miss Carter, let's get this done. My lunch is getting cold." The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. Judge Pritchard rattled through the legal requirements with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grain manifest. Evelyn repeated words she barely heard, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. Colt's responses were equally mechanical, but his hand was warm when he took hers for the ring exchange. The ring was simple silver, worn smooth with age. It slid onto Evelyn's finger like it had been made for her. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Texas," Judge Pritchard announced, "I now pronounce you man and wife. Maddox, you may kiss your bride." Evelyn's breath stopped. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't planned for it. Colt's eyes met hers, asking permission the same way he'd asked before applying salve to her blisters. She gave the smallest nod. He leaned in slowly, carefully, and pressed his lips to her forehead instead of her mouth. Brief, chaste, respectful. "Welcome to marriage," Judge Pritchard said dryly. "Try not to kill each other before the year's out. Mrs. Pritchard, witness signatures?" The judge's wife produced the ledger, and Evelyn signed her name for the last time. Evelyn Carter, the scared girl from Philadelphia who climbed out a window and run. 3 signatures below hers, Colt signed as her husband, and just like that, she became someone new. Mrs. Colt Maddox. Legal. Protected. Changed. "Congratulations," Mrs. Pritchard said, though her tone suggested she was reserving judgment. "I suppose we'll see you both at church on Sunday?" "Suppose so," Colt agreed. He took Evelyn's arm, his wife's arm now, and steered her toward the wagon before anyone else could offer unwanted commentary. They were almost to the street when Thomas Dalton stepped into their path. "Well, well," he said. "Mr. and Mrs. Maddox. How domestic." "Dalton," Colt's voice went flat. "Move." "Just offering my congratulations." Dalton's eyes fixed on Evelyn, traveling over her face, her dress, her hand with its new silver ring. "And my condolences. Marriage to Colt Maddox isn't what most young ladies dream of." "Then it's fortunate I'm not most young ladies," Evelyn said coldly. "No, I suppose you're not," Dalton smiled, and it was the smile of a man who knew secrets he shouldn't. "Tell me, Mrs. Maddox, does your new husband know why you're really here? What you're really running from?" Evelyn's blood went ice cold. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? Strange thing happened last week. Man came through town asking questions about a young woman from Philadelphia. Dark hair, delicate features, probably traveling under a false name. Offered good money for information." Dalton's smile widened. "I told him I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. but memories can be remarkably flexible when the price is right. Colt moved between them so fast Evelyn barely registered the motion. One moment Dalton was standing there, smug and threatening. The next, Colt had him by the collar, slamming him against the nearest wall, hard enough to rattle teeth. "You threatening my wife?" Colt's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Just making conversation," Dalton managed, but fear had crept into his eyes. "Then let me contribute to the conversation." Colt leaned in closer. "You go near her. You speak to her. You so much as look at her wrong. And I will end you. Not legally, not publicly. I'll just make you disappear into the prairie, and nobody will ever find enough of you to bury. We clear?" "Crystal." Colt released him and stepped back. "Good. Now get out of my sight before I forget I just got married and should be in a charitable mood." Dalton straightened his collar with hands that shook slightly, shot Evelyn one last calculating look, and walked away. But his parting words carried back over his shoulder. "That man from Philadelphia? He's still asking questions. And he's getting closer." Evelyn felt the world tilt sideways. Someone was here. Someone was looking for her. Marcus's investigator had made it to Texas, to Dust River, and Thomas Dalton knew about it. "Get in the wagon," Colt said quietly. "Now." She obeyed on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, and none of them good. Colt climbed up beside her and took the reins, his movements controlled but tight with barely suppressed fury. "How much does Dalton know?" Evelyn managed. "Enough to be dangerous, not enough to be certain." Colt guided the horses out of town at a pace that wouldn't draw attention, but wouldn't waste time either. "We need to talk, honestly. No more dancing around the details." "I told you everything." "You told me you were running from your father's business arrangement. You didn't tell me the man was rich enough to send private investigators across half the country. You didn't tell me he had the resources to track you this far." "I didn't know he would." Evelyn's voice broke. I thought if I ran far enough, changed my name, stayed quiet." "Well, he did, and you're not safe yet." Colt's jaw was tight. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. His full name, what kind of money we're dealing with, who he knows, what he's capable of. And then we're going to figure out how to keep you alive." The bluntness of it, "keep you alive," hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on escape, on survival, on making it one more day without getting caught, that she hadn't let herself think about the endgame. What happened when Marcus finally tracked her down? What he'd do when he found her? "His name is Marcus Thornwood," she said quietly. "His family owns silver mines in Colorado and Pennsylvania. He's worth, I don't know the exact number, but it's millions. My father owed him money, and he offered to forgive the debt in exchange for me." "How much debt?" $50,000. Colt whistled low. "That's a lot of money to forgive." "Marcus doesn't care about the money. He cares about winning, about owning things other people want." Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. "He told me once that he'd never met a woman who wouldn't eventually submit, that it was just a matter of finding the right pressure points." "He hurt you?" It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Yes." "How bad?" "Bad enough that I was willing to marry a stranger and move to Texas." She met Colt's eyes. "Bad enough that I bought a gun and learned to shoot it in case he ever found me." Colt was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, "The gun you've got under your pillow?" Evelyn's breath caught. "You knew about that?" "Saw it the first night when I checked your room to make sure the lock worked properly. Figured you had your reasons." He glanced at her. "You any good with it?" "Good enough to hit what I'm aiming at, if it's close enough." "Good. Keep it close. Keep it loaded.
And if anyone comes to the ranch who isn't me or someone I've vouched for, you use it. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just shoot. Understand?
Colt,
Understand?
yes.
They rode in silence for another mile before Colt spoke again. We need a plan. Can't just sit around waiting for this investigator to show up.
What kind of plan?
The kind where we control the narrative. If he's asking questions in town, he's going to hear about our wedding, about the ceremony, about the fact that you're legally Mrs. Maddox now. Colt's expression hardened.
So we make sure that when he does find you, he finds a happily married woman who has no interest in returning to Philadelphia. You think that'll stop him?
Depends how smart he is. If he's smart, he'll report back to Thornwood that you're married and settled and not worth the trouble of extracting. If he's not smart, Colt's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. Then we deal with it another way. Evelyn looked at the man beside her. Her husband now, legally and permanently. A man she'd known for less than a week. A man who'd just threatened to kill someone for her. A man who was planning her defense with the same calm efficiency he used to teach her how to milk a cow.
Why are you doing this? She asked quietly.
Doing what?
Protecting me. Fighting for me. You didn't sign up for this level of complication.
Colt was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you want the truth?
Yes, I sent for a mail-order bride because I couldn't stand the thought of courting someone from town. Couldn't stand the questions, the expectations, the assumption that just because I'm lonely, I'm also desperate. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. Every woman in Dust River looks at me and sees a project. A rough man who needs civilizing. A ranch that needs a woman's touch. They don't see me. They see what I could be if I just changed everything about who I am. And I'm different?
You're running from the same thing I am. People who think they have the right to tell us who to be. Colt finally looked at her. You needed protection. I needed a partner who wouldn't try to fix me. Seemed like a fair trade. Still does.
Even with Marcus's investigator breathing down our necks?
Especially then. His mouth quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. I don't run from fights, Evelyn. Never have. And I sure as hell don't abandon people who need help.
The ranch appeared on the horizon, and Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Home. The word still felt strange, but it was starting to feel true. Colt pulled the wagon up to the house and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist.
First thing, we secure the property. Check all the fences, make sure nothing else is missing. Set up a watch schedule.
A watch schedule?
One of us awake at all times until we know the threat's passed. He met her eyes. You know how to stay awake through the night?
I've had practice.
Then we'll trade off. I'll take midnight to dawn, you take dusk to midnight. Anything unusual, riders, strangers, horses you don't recognize, you wake me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself.
What about during the day?
We work together. No splitting up, no leaving each other's sight. Colt started toward the barn. Come on, let's check the stock.
They spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that. Counting cattle, inspecting horses, walking the fence line. The missing horse was still gone, but nothing else had been disturbed. No signs of forced entry into the barn. No evidence of anyone watching the property. But absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence, and both of them knew it. By evening, they'd established a routine that felt almost military in its precision. Evelyn cooked supper, her first real meal as a married woman, and it showed in the slightly burned edges of the cornbread. Colt ate it without complaint, then showed her how to clean and load the rifle he kept above the mantel.
You know the basics? He asked. Point the dangerous end at the target?
That's a start.
He demonstrated the proper stance, the way to absorb the recoil, where to aim for maximum stopping power.
You ever actually fired one of these? Once, at a tree. I missed.
We'll fix that tomorrow. Colt set the rifle aside. For tonight, keep your pistol close. I'll keep this one with me. They settled into their watch schedule as full dark fell. Evelyn took up position on the porch with a lantern and Colt's rifle, her ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. The prairie at night was full of noises. Wind in the grass, coyotes in the distance, the occasional restless horse in the barn. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a man approaching. At midnight, Colt emerged from the house to trade shifts. He'd changed into work clothes, and he carried a cup of coffee that steamed in the cool night air. "Anything?" he asked. "No. You?" "Quiet inside. You should sleep." Evelyn stood, her muscles stiff from sitting in one position for too long. "Colt?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For today. For all of it." He nodded once, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "That's what husbands do, isn't it? Protect their wives?" "I wouldn't know. You're my first."
Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. "Well then, I'll try to set a decent standard." Evelyn went inside, locked her bedroom door out of habit, and lay down fully clothed with her pistol under her pillow. Sleep should have been impossible, but the exhaustion of the day, the wedding, the confrontation with Dalton, the revelation about Marcus's investigator, caught up with her all at once. She dreamed of Philadelphia, of her father's study and Marcus's teeth, and the window she'd climbed through in the middle of the night. But this time, when she ran, Colt was there waiting. Not to catch her, to run with her. She woke to darkness and the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast, heading toward the ranch. Evelyn was out of bed with her pistol in her hand before she'd fully processed the sound. She unlocked her door and found Colt already moving through the house, rifle in hand, his expression grim. "How many?" she whispered. "3, maybe 4. Could be neighbors, could be trouble." He positioned himself at the front window. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, get to the root cellar and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "I'm not hiding while you—" "Evelyn," his voice cut through her protest. "I can't fight and protect you at the same time. Best way you can help is to stay alive. Understand?" She understood. Hated it, but understood. The horses pulled up outside, and a man's voice called out, "Maddox, you in there?" Colt's shoulders relaxed slightly. "That's Sheriff Coleman. Useless, but not hostile." He opened the door, but kept the rifle visible. "Sheriff, bit late for a social call." "Got a situation." The sheriff was a portly man in his 50s, and even in the darkness Evelyn could see the sweat on his face. "Man rode into town an hour ago. Says he's a private investigator from Philadelphia looking for a missing woman. Says she might be in danger." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "That's so." Colt's voice stayed level. "This woman got a name?" "Evelyn Carter. Says she's—" The sheriff stopped, his eyes finding Evelyn in the doorway behind Colt. "Well, hell." "Well, hell," the sheriff repeated, his eyes moving between Evelyn and Colt. "You're telling me you're Evelyn Carter?" "Was," Colt said before Evelyn could speak. "She's Mrs. Maddox now. Has been since 1 o'clock this afternoon. Judge Pritchard married us. It's all legal." The sheriff's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been relief. Well, that changes things considerably." "Does it?" A new voice cut through the darkness, and a fourth rider moved forward into the lantern light. He was tall, well-dressed despite the dust of travel, with pale eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. "I'm afraid marriage doesn't nullify certain legal obligations, Sheriff." "Who the hell are you?" Colt demanded. "Robert Ashford, private investigator hired by Mr. Marcus Thornwood of Philadelphia. to locate his fiancée. Ashford's gaze fixed on Evelyn with unsettling intensity. "Miss Carter, I've been searching for you for 3 months. Your father and Mr. Thornwood have been very worried."
"I'm not his fiancée,"
Evelyn said, finding her voice despite the terror clawing at her throat.
"I never agreed to marry him."
"Your father signed the contracts."
"My father sold me. There's a difference."
Ashford's expression didn't change. "Be that as it may, Mr. Thornwood has invested considerable time and resources into this arrangement. He's asked me to escort you safely back to Philadelphia so the matter can be resolved properly."
"She's not going anywhere," Colt said flatly. "She's my wife, legally married. She stays here."
Actually, Ashford pulled a folded document from his coat. According to Pennsylvania law, any contract signed prior to her departure remain binding unless properly dissolved. Mr. Thornwood is prepared to pursue legal action to enforce those contracts. "This is Texas," Colt said. "Pennsylvania law doesn't mean shit out here." "Sheriff," Ashford turned to Coleman, "perhaps you could clarify the legal situation." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Well now, that's complicated. If there's contracts involved, and if Mrs. Maddox left without properly dissolving them, then there might be grounds for—" "There are no grounds," Evelyn interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "Those contracts were signed under duress. My father forged my signature. I never consented to anything Marcus Thornwood proposed." "Do you have proof of forgery?" Ashford asked mildly.
"Do you have proof I signed willingly?"
"The contracts bear your signature."
"A signature my father practiced until he could duplicate it perfectly."
Evelyn stepped forward, ignoring Colt's warning hand on her arm.
"Tell me something, Mr. Ashford."
"Did Marcus send you to bring me back? Or did he send you to make sure I couldn't run again?" Something flickered in Ashford's eyes, surprise, maybe, that she'd ask so directly. "I'm simply here to facilitate your safe return."
"By dragging me across the country against my will? That's not facilitation. That's kidnapping."
"It's enforcement of legal contracts."
"Except she's married now," Colt repeated. "That voids any previous agreements."
"Not if those agreements were legally binding first." Ashford refolded the documents. "Look, I understand this is an emotional situation. Mrs. Maddox, I'm sure you believe you're making the right choice. But Mr. Thornwood is not a man who accepts defeat easily. If you refuse to return voluntarily, he will pursue legal remedies, extradition, lawsuits against your husband for harboring stolen property."
"Stolen property?"
Evelyn's voice went cold.
"I'm a person, not property."
"Tell that to the contracts your father signed." Colt's rifle came up so fast that even the sheriff's horse spooked. "Get off my land, now!" "Mr. Maddox, you heard me. You're trespassing. In Texas, that's grounds for shooting a man, and nobody would question it." Colt's voice was deadly calm. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn that horse around. You're going to ride back to town, and you're going to send a telegram to Marcus Thornwood telling him that Evelyn Carter is dead." Ashford's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "She doesn't exist anymore. She died the day she became Mrs. Maddox. Whatever contracts her father signed were with a woman who no longer exists. The woman standing here is my wife, under my protection, and if Thornwood wants her, he'll have to go through me first." "That's remarkably romantic, Mr. Maddox, but legally meaningless." "Then make it legal, Sheriff." Colt turned to Coleman. "What's Texas law say about a married woman's rights versus contracts signed by her father in another state?" The sheriff looked miserable. "Well, technically, once a woman marries, her legal identity merges with her husband's. So any contracts signed before marriage
would need to be renegotiated with the husband's consent. And I don't consent, Colt said. Problem solved. It's not that simple, Ashford protested. Mr. Thornwood is in Pennsylvania, Evelyn said quietly. And I'm in Texas. And unless you plan to forcibly abduct me, which would be illegal even if your contracts weren't, then this conversation is over. Ashford studied her for a long moment, his expression calculating. You've changed, Miss Carter. 3 months ago, you wouldn't have had the nerve to speak to me like this. 3 months ago, I was trapped. Now, I'm free. Tends to change a person. Does it? Ashford's smile was thin, humorless. Or are you just trading one cage for another? Tell me, how well do you know your husband? What he's capable of? What he's done? Better than I knew Marcus Thornwood, and that's good enough. Is it? Mr. Maddox, perhaps you should tell your wife why you really sent for a mail-order bride. Why no woman in town would marry you, despite your property and relative wealth. Colt's jaw tightened, but he didn't lower the rifle. My past is my business, not when it affects my client's interests. Ashford turned back to Evelyn. Did he tell you about Helena Pritchard, the judge's niece? The one who disappeared 5 years ago after accepting Colt Maddox's proposal? Evelyn's blood went cold, but she kept her voice steady. What about her? Never found. Some say she ran off to California. Others say she's buried somewhere on this ranch. Ashford's eyes gleamed. Strange coincidence, isn't it? Woman agrees to marry Colt Maddox, then vanishes without a trace. And now here you are, in exactly the same position. That's a damn lie, Colt said, but something in his voice had gone tight. Is it? Sheriff, perhaps you remember the investigation? Coleman shifted again. There were some questions back then, sure, but nothing was ever proved. Helena's mother got a letter from San Francisco. A letter anyone could have forged, Ashford interrupted. Just like Mr. Maddox claims about the contracts. Interesting how convenient written evidence becomes when it suits one's narrative. Evelyn looked at Colt, really looked at him, searching for truth in the hard lines of his face. Is any of this true? Helena Pritchard existed, Colt said quietly. We were engaged. She left. That's the truth. But did she leave alive? Ashford pressed. Mrs. Maddox, I urge you to consider your situation carefully. You've married a man you barely know, who has a questionable past, who lives in isolation with no witnesses to how he treats you. If something were to happen to you out here, who would know? Who would care? I would know, Evelyn said. I would care, and I'd fight back. Would you? Or would you disappear just like Helena, leaving nothing but convenient letters and unanswered questions? Get off my land! Colt's finger moved to the trigger. Last warning. Ashford raised his hands in mock surrender. Very well, but Mrs. Maddox, know this. Mr. Thornwood doesn't give up. He will pursue legal action. He will make your life here impossible. And when your husband tires of the complications you've brought to his doorstep, when he realizes you're more trouble than you're worth, you'll have nowhere left to run. Then I'll face it when it comes, Evelyn said. But I'm not going back to Philadelphia. Not now. Not ever. Ashford studied her for another long moment, then shrugged. Your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you. He turned his horse. Sheriff, I'll be staying at the boarding house in town for the next few days. If Mrs. Maddox changes her mind, you know where to find me. I won't change my mind, Evelyn said. Everyone says that, until they don't. The riders turned and headed back toward town, hoofbeats fading into the darkness. Evelyn stood frozen until they were completely out of sight.
Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. Colt lowered the rifle and sat beside her. "You okay?" "No." Evelyn's hands were shaking. "Who was Helena Pritchard?" "Exactly what I said. A woman I was engaged to. Judge Pritchard's niece from back east. She came out here expecting civilization and got prairie instead." Colt's voice was flat, emotionless. "She lasted 3 months. Said she couldn't breathe out here. Said the isolation was killing her. Packed her bags one night and left." "And the letter from San Francisco?" "Real. I saw it myself when the judge showed it to me. Helena's handwriting, her seal, everything." He met Evelyn's eyes. "I didn't hurt her, didn't touch her. She left because she wanted to, and I let her go because keeping someone who doesn't want to stay is just another kind of cruelty." "But people suspected." "People always suspect. Woman vanishes, man must have killed her. Doesn't matter that she wrote letters. Doesn't matter that half the town saw her get on the stagecoach. Suspicion sticks whether it's true or not." Evelyn processed this, weighing Ashford's insinuations against everything she'd learned about Colt in the past week. The gentleness, the patience, the way he always asked permission before touching her. The way he'd threatened Dalton for her. The way he'd stood between her and Ashford's threats without hesitation. "I believe you," she said finally. Colt's head snapped up. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Evelyn met his eyes. "Marcus Thornwood would have had me in that wagon by now, dragging me back by force if necessary. You gave me a choice. You keep giving me choices. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Something in Colt's expression cracked open, raw and vulnerable. "Evelyn, but we need to talk about what happens next. Ashford wasn't bluffing about the legal action. Marcus has money and connections and patience. He'll drag this out for years if he has to." "Let him try. This is Texas. Federal judges move slow, and local judges tend to favor local residents over fancy lawyers from back east." "What about Dalton? You saw how interested he was today. What if he decides to help Ashford? Feed him information, offer support, anything to make trouble for you." Colt was quiet for a moment. "Then we deal with both of them." "How?" "Honestly, I don't know yet. But I know this. You're not going back to Philadelphia. I meant what I said. Evelyn Carter is dead. You're Mrs. Maddox now. And that means something. Means you've got someone standing between you and whatever threatens you." "Even if it costs you everything?" "Everything costs something, Evelyn. Question is whether the price is worth paying." He stood, offered her his hand. "Come on, let's get inside. Morning's coming fast, and we've got work to do." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They went inside together, and Colt secured the door, checking the lock twice before he seemed satisfied. "I'll keep watch the rest of the night," he said. "You should sleep." "I won't be able to." "Try anyway. We're going to need clear heads for whatever comes next." Evelyn went to her room, but didn't lock the door this time. Didn't hide the gun under her pillow. Instead, she left both her door and Colt's open. A silent acknowledgement that they were in this together now. Partners. Allies. Married in more than just legal terms. She lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, listening to Colt move through the house, checking windows, testing locks. The sound should have made her nervous. Instead, they felt like safety. Dawn came too fast, and with it, a knock at the front door that sent both of them reaching for weapons. "Mrs. Harrigan," a female voice called. "I know you're in there, Colt Maddox, and I'm not leaving until I've spoken to your wife." Colt opened the door to find the storekeeper standing on his porch with a basket and a determined expression. "Mrs. Harrigan?" he said wearily. "Little early for a social call."
This isn't social. This is survival. She pushed past him into the house, spotted Evelyn emerging from her bedroom, and thrust the basket into her hands. Bread, preserves, cold chicken. You'll need your strength. For what? Evelyn asked. For what's coming. That investigator spent half the night in my store buying supplies and asking questions. About you. About Colt.
About Helena Pritchard. Mrs. Harrigan's expression was grim. He's planning to stay at least a week, maybe longer, and Thomas Dalton's been mighty friendly with him. Too friendly. What are they planning? Colt demanded. Don't know yet, but Dalton's got that look he gets when he's scheming. And that investigator, Ashford, he's not just here to take you back, Mrs. Maddox. He's here to destroy you both, if that's what it takes. Why tell us this? Evelyn asked. You barely know me. Mrs. Harrigan's expression softened slightly. Because I knew Helena Pritchard. Sweet girl, weak constitution, completely unsuited for ranch life. She left because she couldn't handle the isolation, not because Colt hurt her. But people prefer drama to truth, and that lie's been hanging over his head for 5 years. She turned to Colt. Maybe it's time to fight back. Put the truth out there before Ashford and Dalton twist it into something uglier. How? Colt asked. Letters. Helena wrote to her mother regularly from San Francisco until she remarried 2 years ago. I've seen them myself. The judge shows them to anyone who asks, trying to clear your name. But people forget. Maybe it's time to remind them. And if that's not enough, then you prepare for war. Mrs. Harrigan headed for the door. Because that's what this is becoming. Ashford's got money behind him. Dalton's got influence. You've got... She looked at Evelyn. A wife who's already proved she's tougher than she looks. Use that. She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, and Evelyn turned to Colt with raised eyebrows. She's intense, Evelyn said. She's also right. Colt moved to the window, watching Mrs. Harrigan's wagon disappear down the road. This is about to get ugly. Ashford and Dalton together? That's a bad combination. One's got resources, the other's got local knowledge. They'll use every dirty trick they can think of. So what do we do? We stop reacting and start acting. Colt turned to face her. No more hiding. No more waiting for them to make the next move. We take this fight to them. How? We show the town exactly who you are and why you're here. No secrets, no shame. We tell them about Marcus Thornwood, about the contracts, about why you ran. We make it clear that you're not some helpless victim being manipulated. You're a woman who made a choice and is standing by it. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. You want me to tell the whole town that I was being sold like livestock? I want you to tell them the truth. Because the truth is that you're brave as hell, and anyone who'd fault you for running from abuse isn't worth knowing. They'll judge me. Some will, others won't. But either way, it's better than letting Ashford control the narrative. Colt's eyes were serious. This is your choice, Evelyn. Always your choice. But if you want my opinion, I say we fight. Publicly. Loudly. Make it impossible for them to paint you as some confused girl who needs rescuing. Evelyn thought about it. About standing in front of the town and admitting what her father had done. What Marcus had tried to do. About exposing the worst moment of her life to public scrutiny. Then she thought about Ashford's smug expression. About Marcus Thornwood's absolute certainty that she'd eventually submit. About spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next investigator, the next threat, the next attempt to drag her back. When? She asked. Sunday, church. Everyone will be there. That's 3 days away. Good. Gives us time to prepare. To get our story straight.
to make sure we're presenting a united front. Colt moved closer. You sure about this? No, but I'm sure about not going back to Philadelphia. And if that means standing up in church and telling the whole town why, then that's what I'll do. Okay then.
Colt's mouth quirked into something that might have been pride. Mrs. Maddox, I think you're about to surprise a lot of people. Starting with myself, Evelyn muttered. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Colt taught Evelyn to shoot properly, not just pointing and hoping, but actually aiming, breathing, squeezing instead of pulling the trigger. She hit the target more often than she missed by the second day, and by the third, she could group her shots within inches of each other. You're a natural, Colt said, watching her reload. Or properly motivated. That too. They practiced her story together, refining the details, deciding what to share and what to keep private. Evelyn found it harder than she'd expected, not because the memories hurt, though they did, but because she'd spent so long burying them that dragging them back into daylight felt like reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. But Colt was patient, never pushed, never demanded more than she could give, and slowly, painfully, Evelyn found her voice. By Saturday night, she was ready, or as ready as she'd ever be. Last chance to change your mind, Colt said over supper. I'm not changing my mind. Good. He pushed his empty plate aside. Then let's make sure you know exactly what you're walking into. Some people will support you. Mrs. Harrigan, probably Doc Pritchard and his wife. A few of the ranch families who've known me for years. But others, Mrs. Pritchard, some of the church ladies, definitely Dalton. They'll use this against you. They'll say you're lying, or exaggerating, or that you brought it on yourself somehow. I know. And Ashford will be there, probably with more of his evidence and legal threats. Let him. Colt studied her face. You've changed, you know, from the woman who got off that stagecoach a week ago. A week? Is that all it's been? 8 days, technically, but yeah, you're different. Stronger. Evelyn looked at her hands, callous now, toughened by work and no longer trembling at every sudden movement. I had to be. No, you chose to be. There's a difference. That night, Evelyn slept without nightmares for the first time since Philadelphia. And when she woke Sunday morning to Colt's gentle knock, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope lasted exactly as long as it took to arrive at the church and see Robert Ashford standing on the steps beside Thomas Dalton, both of them wearing expressions that promised trouble. Second thoughts, Colt murmured as he helped Evelyn down from the wagon. Too late for those. She smoothed her dress with hands that wanted to shake, but refused to. Let's finish this. They walked toward the church entrance, and Ashford stepped directly into their path. Mrs. Maddox, he said with exaggerated politeness. How lovely to see you again. I trust you've had time to reconsider my client's generous offer? Your client can go to hell, Evelyn said clearly. And you can join him. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Mrs. Pritchard clutched her Bible like she'd witnessed murder. Several ranch wives whispered furiously behind gloved hands. Ashford's smile didn't waver. Strong words for a woman in a precarious legal position. I've taken the liberty of consulting with local authorities about the enforceability of certain contracts. The news isn't favorable for you. The news isn't legal until a judge says it is, Colt said. And Judge Pritchard already married us. That makes everything else noise. Does it? Dalton spoke for the first time, his voice carrying across the churchyard. Interesting thing about Judge Pritchard. He's been known to annul marriages when presented with evidence of fraud or coercion, especially when one party withheld critical information. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Your mental state, Mrs. Maddox. Mr. Ashford has documentation from Philadelphia physicians suggesting you've suffered from nervous disorders, hysteria, delusions, the kind of conditions that would render any legal agreements made during an episode potentially invalid.
That's a lie, Evelyn said, but her voice shook. Is it?
Dr. Marcus Thornwood, your fiancé is a physician, did you forget? Has detailed records of your treatment, your instability, your tendency toward dramatic exaggeration and paranoid accusations against innocent parties. Dalton pulled papers from his coat. He's prepared to testify that you fled Philadelphia in a state of mental distress, that your claims of abuse are fantasies, and that this hasty marriage is simply another manifestation of your condition. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Evelyn saw doubt creeping into faces that had been neutral moments before.
Marcus isn't a physician, Evelyn said desperately.
He studied medicine, but never practiced. He holds a medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania, Ashford interrupted. That's sufficient for his testimony to carry weight, especially when corroborated by your own father, who's prepared to swear that you've always been prone to flights of fancy and emotional instability.
My father sold me, Evelyn's voice broke. He forged my signature on contracts and sold me to pay his gambling debts.
Or so you claim. But where's your proof? Dalton's smile was vicious. All we have is your word against two respected men, one of whom is a physician with documented evidence of your condition. Colt moved between them and Evelyn. You've made your point. Now step aside. Not quite. Ashford produced another document. I have here a petition for annulment, signed by Marcus Thornwood as the aggrieved party in a prior contract. He's arguing that Mrs. Maddox's marriage to you was undertaken while she was mentally incompetent and therefore invalid. That's insane, Evelyn said. Ironic choice of words. Dalton's grin widened. Given the circumstances. Enough. A new voice cut through the chaos. Judge Pritchard, emerging from the church with his wife behind him. What's the meaning of this disruption? Ashford turned smoothly. Your Honor, I apologize for the disturbance. I'm simply serving legal notice that my client intends to challenge the validity of the marriage you performed earlier this week. On what grounds? Mental incompetence of the bride. I have medical documentation. Let me see it. Ashford handed over the papers. Judge Pritchard read them slowly, his expression unreadable. The entire churchyard had gone silent, waiting. Finally, the judge looked up. These documents are signed by Marcus Thornwood, claiming to be a licensed physician? Yes, Your Honor. And when was Mr. Thornwood licensed to practice medicine? Ashford hesitated. I believe he completed his degree in 1879. But did he ever obtain a license? Because practicing medicine without proper licensure would make any diagnosis he rendered legally meaningless. The judge's eyes were sharp. And calling oneself a doctor without proper credentials is fraud. I would need to verify. You should have verified before wasting everyone's time. Judge Pritchard handed the papers back. Until you can produce proof of Mr. Thornwood's license to practice medicine in Pennsylvania, his medical opinions carry no legal weight in my courtroom. Petition for annulment denied. Evelyn felt her knees go weak with relief. But Dalton wasn't finished. What about the original contracts? He pressed. Surely those still carry weight. The contract signed by her father? The judge's voice went cold. In Texas, a father cannot sign away his adult daughter's autonomy. Any such contracts would be unenforceable here. Is there anything else, gentlemen? Because you're disrupting Sunday services. Ashford's professional mask slipped for the first time. Mr. Thornwood will not accept this. Then Mr. Thornwood can come to Texas himself and make his case. Until then, you're harassing a legally married woman. Judge Pritchard turned to the crowd. Unless anyone here has legitimate objections to the Maddox marriage,
I suggest we proceed with services." Silence. No one spoke. Even Dalton seemed to realize he'd overplayed his hand. But Mrs. Pritchard couldn't resist one final barb. "I suppose we're expected to simply accept that this woman, this stranger, has valid reasons for running halfway across the country and trapping our colt in marriage?" "Trapping?" Evelyn turned to face her, and something in her expression made the older woman step back. "You want to know why I'm here? I'll tell you. All of you." "Evelyn," Colt said quietly.
"You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She moved to the church steps where everyone could see her, where every eye in Dust River was fixed on her face. "My name was Evelyn Carter. My mother died when I was 16. My father started gambling to cope with the grief, and by the time I was 22, he owed more money than he could ever repay. So he made a deal with Marcus Thornwood, $50,000 in exchange for my hand in marriage." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Evelyn pushed on. "I didn't agree to it. I didn't sign anything. But my father practiced my signature until he could forge it perfectly. And suddenly, I had a wedding date and a fiancé who looked at me like I was property he'd purchased. When I tried to refuse, Marcus told me it didn't matter what I wanted, that I'd learned to submit once we were married, that resistance only made it more exciting for him." Several women in the crowd gasped. Evelyn saw Mrs. Harrigan nodding grimly. "The night before the wedding, Marcus cornered me in the conservatory. He said he wanted to sample what he'd bought. I fought him. I screamed. I clawed at his face hard enough to draw blood." Evelyn's voice didn't shake now. It rang clear and hard across the churchyard. "He bit me, left marks on my shoulder that lasted for weeks. And when I told my father what happened, he said I should be grateful Marcus still wanted me after I'd made such a scene." "This is hardly appropriate for," Mrs. Pritchard began. "I'm not finished," Evelyn's eyes flashed. "That night, I climbed out my bedroom window with nothing but the clothes I wore and the money I'd stolen from my father's desk. I spent 3 months running, sleeping in train stations, hiding from investigators, changing my name 3 times. And when I saw Colt Maddox's advertisement for a wife who could work hard and wouldn't complain about isolation, I answered it because I had nowhere else to go." She turned to look at Colt, standing at the base of the steps with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I married him expecting a business arrangement, a roof and protection in exchange for labor. But what I found was a man who asks permission before touching me, who teaches me patience instead of demanding perfection, who stands between me and anyone who threatens me without asking what's in it for him." Her voice softened. "So yes, Mrs. Pritchard, I'm a stranger. I'm running from something. But I'm not trapping anyone. I'm choosing freedom over slavery. And if you can't understand that, then I don't want your approval." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mrs. Harrigan started clapping, slowly, deliberately. One by one, other hands joined hers. Doc Pritchard and his wife, several ranch families, even Judge Pritchard himself. But not everyone. Mrs. Pritchard's face was pinched with disapproval. Dalton looked furious. And Ashford. Ashford was staring at her with something that might have been respect. "Well," he said finally, "that was quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance. It was the truth." "Perhaps. But truth and proof aren't the same thing." He tucked the useless papers back into his coat. "I'll report to Mr. Thornwood that you're alive, married, and unwilling to return. What he does with that information is his concern, not mine." "That's it?" Evelyn couldn't believe it. "You're just giving up?" "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Maddox. I was hired to locate you and assess the situation. I've done both. Whether Mr. Thornwood chooses to pursue further action isn't my responsibility." Ashford tipped his hat.
For what it's worth, you were right to run. I've met Marcus Thornwood. He's not a man I'd want my daughter anywhere near." He walked away, and Evelyn felt something in her chest unclench. One threat down. But Dalton remained, his eyes calculating. "Touching story."
Doesn't change the fact that you've brought trouble to Dust River. Investigators, legal threats, disrupted church services. How long before Thornwood decides to make a more direct approach? How long before his problems become our problems? "That's enough, Dalton." Judge Pritchard's voice was sharp. "The Maddox marriage is legal and will remain so. If you have complaints, bring them to my courtroom with actual evidence. Otherwise, keep your speculation to yourself." Dalton smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Of course, Your Honor. Just concern for the community's welfare." He glanced at Colt. "And for those who might find themselves caught in the crossfire when Thornwood decides to escalate." He sauntered away, and Evelyn watched him go with growing dread. "He's not done," she said quietly. "Neither are we." Colt took her arm. "Come on, let's go home." They made it halfway back to the ranch before they spotted the smoke, black and thick, rising from exactly where the barn should be. Colt swore and whipped the horses into a gallop, the wagon bouncing dangerously over the rough road. Evelyn held on with white knuckles, her heart in her throat. The barn was fully engulfed when they arrived, flames eating through the wooden structure with terrifying speed. The horses had already scattered from the attached corral, but the milk cow was trapped inside, bellowing in terror. Colt was off the wagon before it fully stopped. "Stay here!" "Like hell!" Evelyn jumped down after him. "What can I do?" "Pump water. Fill every bucket you can find. Try to stop it from spreading to the house." He was already running toward the barn. "And if I'm not out in 2 minutes, don't come after me." He disappeared into the smoke before she could argue. Evelyn ran to the pump, working the handle frantically, filling bucket after bucket and throwing water at the side of the house closest to the barn. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, and her eyes streamed tears as she worked. 1 minute passed, then 2. Colt didn't emerge. Evelyn abandoned the pump and ran toward the barn entrance, screaming his name. The smoke was too thick to see through, the heat pushing her back like a physical force. Then Colt appeared, leading Buttercup by a rope tied around her neck, his face black with soot and his shirt smoking. The cow was terrified, but moving, and together they made it clear of the collapsing structure. Colt turned the cow loose and collapsed to his knees, coughing violently. Evelyn grabbed him, checked him for burns, for injuries, for anything that needed immediate attention. "I'm okay," he managed between coughs. "Just give me a second." The barn collapsed in on itself with a sound like thunder. Everything inside, tools, feed, supplies they couldn't afford to replace, gone in minutes. "It was arson," Colt said hoarsely. "I could smell the kerosene." Someone deliberately set this. Dalton? Probably. Can't prove it, but yeah. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "This is a warning. He's showing us what he can do if we don't—" He stopped. They both heard it at the same time. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders approaching fast. Evelyn reached for the pistol tucked into her skirt pocket, but Colt caught her wrist. "Wait. Look." It wasn't Dalton's men. It was half the congregation from church. Mrs. Harrigan driving her wagon loaded with supplies. Doc Pritchard on horseback. Judge Pritchard with his wife. Even some of the ranch families Evelyn had seen whispering earlier. Mrs. Harrigan pulled up first. "We saw the smoke. Brought what we could." "Why?" Evelyn managed. "After everything." "Because you told the truth," Mrs. Harrigan said simply. "And because Colt Maddox has been alone too long."
Everyone deserves help when they're under attack. The next hour was controlled chaos. Men formed bucket brigades to douse the remaining flames and prevent the fire from spreading. Women sorted through the salvageable supplies and made lists of what needed replacing. Doc Pritchard examined Colt's lungs and pronounced him singed but functional. And Judge Pritchard pulled Colt aside for a quiet conversation that Evelyn couldn't hear but could read in the grim set of both men's jaws. By sunset, the fire was out. The barn was a total loss, but the house was safe. The animals were scattered but alive, and Colt and Evelyn were standing in the ruins of what they'd built, with an army of supporters around them. "This was Dalton," Judge Pritchard said without preamble. "We all know it. Can't prove it in court, but we know." "What can we do about it?" Colt asked. "Legally? Nothing without evidence. Practically?" The judge's expression hardened. "We make it clear that attacking one of us is attacking all of us. Dalton wants a war. He'll get one."
"I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me," Evelyn protested. "Too late for that, child. This stopped being about you the moment Dalton decided to escalate." Mrs. Harrigan stepped forward. "He's been pushing for control of this territory for years, buying up land, forcing out families who won't sell, making life impossible for anyone who opposes him. You're just the latest target. If we let him win here, nobody's safe." "What she said," Doc Pritchard agreed. "We draw the line at arson, at violence, at terrorizing young women who've already suffered enough." Evelyn looked at the faces around her. People she barely knew, offering help she hadn't asked for. Offering protection, not because they owed her anything, but because it was right. "Thank you," she whispered. "Save your thanks," Mrs. Harrigan said briskly, "and start making a list of what you need to rebuild. This community takes care of its own, and like it or not, you're ours now." The crowd dispersed as darkness fell, promising to return in the morning to start reconstruction. Colt and Evelyn were left alone in the ruins, exhausted and smoke-stained, but somehow not defeated. "Hell of a first week of marriage," Colt said finally. "Is it always like this?" "God, I hope not." He looked at her in the fading light. "You okay? Honestly?" Evelyn took inventory. Her dress was ruined. Her hands were blistered again from the pump handle. Her throat hurt from smoke inhalation. Her barn was ash, and her future was uncertain. But Marcus Thornwood's investigator had given up. Judge Pritchard had validated her marriage. The town had rallied around them, and Colt Maddox was standing beside her like he had no intention of leaving. "I'm okay," she said, and meant it. "Better than okay, actually." "How's that?" "Because for the first time since my mother died, I'm not alone." She met his eyes. "I'm not running anymore, Colt. Whatever comes next, I'm staying. I'm fighting. This is my home now, and nobody's taking it from me." Something shifted in Colt's expression. Pride, maybe, or relief, or something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "Good," he said quietly, "because I'm done being alone too." They stood together in the settling darkness, smoke-stained and exhausted, looking at the wreckage of their barn and the house that had somehow survived. Tomorrow they'd rebuild. Tomorrow they'd face whatever Dalton tried next. Tomorrow they'd continue the fight that had only just begun. But tonight they were simply two people who'd chosen each other against all odds, and discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stand your ground and refuse to be moved. 3 months later, Evelyn stood in the doorway of the rebuilt barn, bigger than the original, built with help from neighbors who'd become friends, and watched Colt work with the horses in the corral. The ranch had survived Dalton's attacks. Marcus Thornwood had never sent another investigator. Judge Pritchard had officially denied every petition for annulment that Ashford's firm had filed. And Evelyn Carter, the frightened girl from Philadelphia, no longer existed. Mrs. Colt Maddox stood in her place, stronger, tougher, fiercer than anyone had expected, including herself. When Colt caught her watching and smiled, she smiled back, touching the silver ring on her finger that had become more than just legal protection. It had become a promise, a partnership, a choice they both made new every day. She'd run from Philadelphia to escape a cage and found freedom in the wide Texas prairie, where nobody could force her to be anything she didn't choose, where standing her ground mattered more than surrendering, where the hardest fights led to the truest victories. This was her life now, built on her own terms, defended by her own strength, shared with someone who'd proven that not all men bite unless asked, and that the ones who respect boundaries are worth keeping close.